Supreme Court of Florida.
The Supreme Court of Florida is convened in ceremonial session at the request of the Florida Supreme Court Historical Society for the Justice Joseph Hatchett Award History Program to honor our former colleague who has gone on to a better position, foregoing the joys and pleasures of mere attention. The court welcomes each of you and thanks you for joining us on this historic occasion. This is the first ceremonial session in which we have utilized our renovated courtroom. As you can see and probably hear, work is still going on. Time gets too out, our marshal will take care of it. You may think it is strange that there's a hole in the wall behind the bench. I say to you by way of explanation that it's to accommodate a camera which is to be installed shortly. That camera and another one at the located wall back of the courtroom was to be used to record court proceedings for the FSU lawsuit. I'm advised that these proceedings are being transcribed and will be a part of the permanent records of the state archives and will be available to students and historians who are interested in the history of the Supreme Court. The court is very obliged to the Historical Society for its efforts and for its fine work. May I just take a moment to read to you very hurriedly a letter that was faxed to me a moment ago from Judge Paul H. Reubin, former Chief Judge of the 11th, and he says, "Dear Justice Early, although the oral history program for Justice," he's put it in quotes, "Justice Joseph Hatchett will focus on his service on the Supreme Court of Florida and the years prior thereto, and not on his service as a judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals. I had hoped to attend the session in Tallahassee today. As things played out, however, I will not be there. I do want to commend your court in honoring Judge Hatchett and recording his history through his service on your court. He has had an extraordinary career in public service, state and federal. With his lifetime appointment to our court, it is apparent that he will remain in public asset. Judge Hatchett is a wonderful judge. Sitting with him on cases presented to our court, one knows that the arguments will be respectfully and carefully considered and the facts objectively evaluated, the law strictly applied, and the opinion written with precision. He is extremely capable in handling administrative matters. The word on our court is, do not ask Judge Hatchett to do anything unless you want it done well and right away. I regret that I cannot be present in your courtroom to witness the oral history program. Thank you for inviting me. Sincerely, Paul H. Reubin. I'll now turn the program over to the President of Society, Honorable P. Smith.
Mr. Chief Justice, members of the court, may it please the court. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining the Florida Historical Society in honoring Judge Hatchett on this occasion. We are delighted to have the opportunity to carry out this ceremonial session in the newly renovated courtroom, perhaps the first proceeding of the court, albeit a ceremonial proceeding that has taken place since the renovation. And we are particularly pleased with the numbers who have joined us on this occasion. It's a great tribute, one well-deserved, to Judge Hatchett. This oral history program is part of the efforts of the Supreme Court of the state of Florida and the trustees, the officers, and the members of the Florida Historical Society to preserve the rich legal and judicial history of this state and to recognize and honor distinguished members of our Supreme Court who have contributed to that history and to the advancement of the administration of justice in this state. Many of those in this audience today have contributed materially to the efforts of the society. We're grateful to you, Mr. Chief Justice, and to your colleagues for the interest you have demonstrated so long in the society and for the unfailing cooperation and support you have given us in our work. We are particularly grateful, may I say, sir, for the heroic efforts which were made to prepare the building and the courtroom for this occasion. We know it took special effort, and we're grateful to all involved. We're also grateful to those who have worked so long in the interests of the society, particularly, if I may say so, to the spouses and to the friends of the court who do so much of the invaluable but nearly always unsung work which is essential to the efforts and to the success of the society. I'm sure those of you who work in the role of unsung heroes and heroines are never thanked enough. On behalf of the society, I do want to tell you how very grateful we are for your continuing interest and your support. We're also grateful to Nancy Dobson, who truly is a jewel in our crown. And without her dedication, we simply could not function. I know I certainly could not have gotten through this past year without her. Nancy, I'm told on good authority, has even given her spare bedrooms to the cause. They have been used during the renovation of the court as the repository for the archives and objects of the society. I trust the portraits, all these male portraits, were not in that bedroom. We do thank Nancy, however, not only for her dedication, but also for her space. We are here today, however, primarily to thank and to recognize a pioneer of the state of Florida, one who is currently a distinguished judge on the United States Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit, one who was a distinguished justice of this court, and one who is and who long has been in the vanguard of his race, especially in the legal community and more particularly in the administration of justice through the discharge of important public office. We are here on this occasion to honor and to recognize Judge Joseph W. Hatchett. Before proceeding with the presentations to be made regarding his career, I do wish on behalf of the society to acknowledge that there are members of his family and friends here with us. We are grateful for their attendance, their support, and their participation, and they will be introduced to us later as the program proceeds. We have some distinguished Floridians in the period of my career at the bar, some of Florida's most distinguished Floridians who are here today to participate in this program and to honor Judge Hatchett. And it is now my pleasure to recognize them for their presentations. First, to speak to us regarding Judge Hatchett's career in the private practice of law is George W. Allen, Esquire, of Fort Lauderdale, now of counsel to the Fort Lauderdale firm of Platt, Haas, and Lansman. Mr. Allen was born in Sanford, received his BA degree from Florida A&M University and his JD degree from the University of Florida. He is a past president of the National Bar Association and the Broward County Bar Association. He was a member of the American Bar Association's House of Delegates and is the former chair of Florida A&M's Board of Advisors. Mr. Allen.
May it please the Court, Mr. Chief Justice. Ladies and gentlemen, in 1959, Joseph W. Hatchett started the private practice of law in Daytona Beach, Florida. He had a very general practice and worked in all of the counties bordering Volusia, including using Daytona Beach merely as his base of operations. His main competition for the lucrative practice of law in that part of the state was Horace Hill, Esquire. Horace has the dubious distinction of introducing both of us to the practice of law. In 1963, I had the good fortune to practice against Joe in some monumental cases dealing with fairly complex issues of law. These were big cases with fees of at least $50, and then we had some smaller ones. Horace Hill assigned me in the first case to do research, and we won a big contested divorce case in Volusia County. And Joe was on the other side, and Horace and I beat up on him badly. We later shared Annette Bryan as a legal secretary, and she worked for Horace, Joe, and me for well over 30 years, and probably taught all of us more than we learned anywhere else. Joe, always the gentleman, would never dream of sandbagging a fellow lawyer. He had the demeanor in and out of the courtroom that foretold his lifelong ambition to be a judge. His judicial demeanor, manner, and behavior personified his genteel Southern upbringing. He had a Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University education and a Howard University law degree, which equipped him well for the private practice of law in the sovereign and southern state of Florida. He was a gentleman and a genteel man. He was Joe Hatchett, attorney and counselor at law, and all of that personified in the state that had fewer than 25 black attorneys in Florida when he embarked into the private practice in 1959. He learned how to charge from Horace Hill. He also learned a few other valuable lessons from Horace. Joe was an inspiration to many young men and women who dared to aspire to the honorable profession of lawyer. Joseph Hatchett personified at all times the most glorious attributes of what a lawyer should look like, how a lawyer should talk, how a lawyer should write, how a lawyer should conduct his private business, how a lawyer should live, how a lawyer should win, and how a lawyer should lose, how a lawyer should enter public service, how a lawyer should progress through the levels of public service, always honorable, always circumspect, always Joseph W. Hatchett. Thank you for being my friend.
Our next presenter is Justice Jesse J. McCrary, Jr., who will speak about Judge Hatchett's career in public service. Mr. McCrary is presently a member of the law firm of McCrary, Self, and Dove. He is a graduate of Florida A&M University, receiving its baccalaureate degrees and its JD degree. He was commissioner of the Industrial Relations Commission of Florida from 1971 to 74, was a member of the Florida Constitutional Revision Commission 1976, and served as Secretary of State of the state of Florida 1978-79. Formerly a member of the Board of Trustees of Florida Memorial College, he is presently a member of the Board of Trustees of the University of Miami. Mr. McCrary.
May it please the Court, Chief Justice-elect, other distinguished members of the Court, President Smith, Judge and Mrs. Hatchett, my Governor Reubin Askew, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. For almost a quarter of a century, this great tower of strength has served mankind and served it with distinction. On July 1, 1966, the loyal Democrat, lawyer Joseph Hatchett, was appointed as an Assistant United States Attorney for the Middle District of Florida, based in Jacksonville. For 2 years, he served under Judge Edward Borman, who at that time was the United States Attorney for the district. And soon thereafter, this loyal Democrat star started to rise, because it was of the Republicans, the Honorable John Briggs, who sensed his natural ability to get along with people, his leadership qualities, and made Joseph Hatchett first Assistant U.S. Attorney. Mr. Briggs had the following to say about lawyer Joseph Hatchett. He was an exceptional lawyer who had a calm, natural ability to get along with people, coupled with his uncommon common sense, end of quote. During his tenure as first Assistant U.S. Attorney, this lawyer, Joseph Hatchett, through the sheer force of personality and judicial intellect, was able to shape the lives of numerous lawyers and created friendships the like of which we see few times during our lifetime. Two of the people who worked for Joe Hatchett, John W. Caven and Allen P. Clark, remember him as a leader and as a person with a sense of fair play. These two gentlemen had this to say about their leader, Joe Hatchett. Quote, Joe Hatchett instructed us all to reflect carefully about the authorization of prosecution, noting that the most significant step in the prosecution procedure was the arrest. Joe Hatchett would point out that the arrest could take place in the presence of friends, business associates, and family, and nothing thereafter could erase the trauma and the stigma of that event. Thus, we were cautioned to make sure about our facts and the law before embarking on prosecution. However, once the journey was started, proceed with all vigor. End of tape. While serving as first United States Attorney, he sought to inspire, to teach, and develop a harmonious relationship with other agencies of the United States government. It was during his tenure as first Assistant U.S. Attorney that he organized, quote, the United States Basketball League, which consisted of only two teams, the United States Attorney's Office and the local FBI. Although he was a fierce competitor of Michael Jordan, he was not. Judge Harvey Schlesinger, currently the United States Magistrate for the Middle District of Florida and the man who succeeded Judge Hatchett as the first Assistant U.S. Attorney and succeeded him as United States Magistrate, remembers Judge Hatchett as an extremely religious person. However, there does remain a dispute between the two of them until this day as to which of them saved the other's life. The story goes that they were flying from Tampa on a government plane one day after trying a very complex case in that jurisdiction, when suddenly this small propeller plane hit an air pocket and started to drop. Judge Schlesinger looked at Judge Hatchett and said to him, I think we ought to pray. And Joe Hatchett looked back at him without cracking a smile and said, you're slow. I've been through the Bible 3 times since we started falling. Never one to lose his sense of humor and be innovative at the same time, Joe Hatchett was a master at protecting those persons who worked directly for him and the staff who supported them. In 1970, there had been a number of bomb threats against the draft board that was located near the United States Attorney's office. Numerous calls had come in, secretaries were afraid, support staff were afraid that the building may be bombed. Joe Hatchett, being the chief administrator of that office at that time, and being the innovative person that he was and is, ordered the staff that they should have a sign printed 16 by 16, hang it on outside of the building, and the sign would say, the draft office is located at 400 West Bay Street, not in this building. In 1971, First Assistant Joe Hatchett, thinking that the position of United States Magistrate would be a good career move, sought the advice and counsel of his then boss, John L. Briggs. These two people had forged a powerful friendship, and it was Judge Hatchett's opinion at the time that the wise counsel of Mr. Briggs would be helpful in making a decision as to whether he should pursue the new post. Because of Judge Hatchett's loyalty to the office, Mr. Briggs thought that it was best that he level with him and give him the best advice that he could, so that he could help his friend and his loyal employee make the best career decision. Mr. Briggs told Joe Hatchett as follows, do not take the job of United States Magistrate because it's a dead end. End of quote. This lawyer, Joe Hatchett, obviously was not one to blindly follow what his boss said. He took the job and served honorably as United States Magistrate until September of 1975. I am sure that after the next introduction, the next speaker will give you, as Paul Harvey says, the rest of the story. Thank you, Joe Hatchett, for making our lives richer, and may this history inspire children yet unborn.
Our next speaker, Reubin Askew, has not only had experience generally in the Tallahassee area, but is experienced in these ceremonial sessions, having participated, so I'm informed, in the programs honoring Justices Roberts, O'Connell, and England. A distinguished Floridian, a distinguished public servant. He was a distinguished member of the House of Representatives and of the Senate, the state of Florida, before being elected to the high office of Governor of Florida in 1971, a position in which he served until 1979. During that period of time, he was chair both of the Southern Governors Association and the National Governors Association. Following his term of service as governor, with the rank of ambassador, he served as United States Trade Representative, a recipient of numerous awards for his distinguished public service. Reubin Askew is here today to discuss with us Judge Hatchett's appointment to the court. Governor Askew.
Thank you very much, Mr. Smith, Mr. Chief Justice, members of the court. Please accord and our distinguished honoree, Judge Hatchett and Mrs. Hatchett, our distinguished Secretary of State, and friends. It's always an occasion that I look forward to in these ceremonies because there's something exceptionally warm about them. I think of those of us who are privileged to have been privileged to have participated in the process of government. Recognize ultimately one of the great things that comes out of it is a fellowship. I think of all the things I was able to participate in during that time. Judicial reform and the attention to the judicial branch was one that I probably spent more time than any other issue. I was introduced to it very early by young Chesterfield Smith and D.K. Roberts, Stephen O'Connell, because I remembered what Leroy Collins, one of my favorite people, once said that the quality of a gubernatorial administration is often determined by the quality of its judicial appointments. Because governors come and go, and the judges, their tenure is much longer, and the impact is greater. So one of the first things I was able to do my first year was to start merit selection of judges. I'm happy that we were able to get it fully into the Constitution for appellate judges. I look forward to the time, Mr. Chief Justice, I followed your remarks. I totally agree, all the way to the trial court level. And for those of us who have worked hard, we're pleased in a sense with the structure of Florida. There are other things that we might need to change. But ultimately, it's the people who fill the judgeships that make the difference. We've been privileged, for the most part in Florida, to have outstanding people participating in the judiciary. I think back to someone once told me that I made 14,000 appointments when I was governor for 8 years. I don't remember all of them, of course. Some you remember. A lot of them are here today. I remember appointing Jesse McCrary, and it was a source of great pride to appoint Jesse Secretary of State. And I remember that sunny afternoon when I asked Joseph Hatchett to come by the mansion, and I was out sitting by the pool. Joe, you probably don't remember this, but I don't have a swimming pool now, Joe, but But it was a very outstanding panel from which I had to make that selection. But it was a pleasing thing to see a person who had committed himself to justice, and ultimately that's really what it's about. If you take away all the trimmings of the structure, all the law and everything, what you're trying to get is what my friend B.K. Roberts always said was simply equal justice before the law. And so to have somebody like Justice Hatchett to aspire, I looked him over, frankly, very careful as I looked over other appointments to the high bench, of which some are here with me today. One of our survivors, of course, is Ben Overton. Justice Sundberg had a distinguished tenure on the court. I would like to have appointed Justice McCreary higher than he was Secretary of State. Unfortunately, he aspired to the lifestyle of George Allen and therefore didn't live off of it. But I remember that visit well, and I came away with such a feeling of satisfaction in being able to give him the opportunity to serve on the High Court, and this is a court of which I have tremendous respect. And I must say, again, that I commend this Historical Society for perpetuating this effort. And when I appointed Joe, one of the things that I remembered so much was what his mother must have been thinking. His mother was here for us the day that he took office formally. She's passed away since that time, so has my mother, but it's an interesting thing that when thoughts run through your head is that my mother and his mother struggled. And almost the whole time I kept thinking about his mother and what he meant to her and what all of those who participate in the process can have as an impact. So I was extremely pleased to be able to appoint Justice Hatchett. He served this court well. He's gone on and served in the federal judiciary with distinction. You've made us proud, as you've made all your family, your beautiful family, with you today. And we want to tell you that it's people such as you, Judge, that make the process work. Because if we lose sight of that which we talk about when we talk about trying to resolve differences among people, the compassion, the wisdom, the law that has to be considered, you lose so much of it. So many of those who served had that touch. You had it and you retain it. And so as one that was just happened to be at the right time, at the right place, Judge, I'm delighted to have had this opportunity and to share this moment with you, to thank you for your service, to commend you for it, for you and Betty. Donna would like very much to have been a part of this ceremony because she thinks so much of you as well. But I thank you and commend you and say to you that the system is working, and you are a great manifestation of that success. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. Our next presenter to speak as the campaign chairman of Justice Hatchett's 1976 campaign for the Supreme Court is, or has been known to some of us as Smith the Elder. Some might they'll say Smith the Ancient. He is certainly one of Florida's most distinguished lawyers, long a leader of Florida's largest law firm and one of its most distinguished, the firm of Holland and Knight, a former president of the Florida Bar and of the American Bar Association, recipient of innumerable awards for distinguished public and professional service, including the American Bar Association's Gold Medal, a distinguished national leader of the organized bar, Chesterfield Smith.
your ladyship, your high, learned, and exalted federal lordship, and Betty, I am still alive. I am pleased to see young people growing up. If I was a young man when I instructed Governor Askew about judicial reform, he was in kindergarten. I am 72, and this is a happy day for me. 72 is a lot, isn't it, Justice O'Connell? This is the first year yet that I have ever been able to hide my own Easter eggs and didn't find a one. Things do go along. By my own personal standards, the still relatively young Joseph W. Hatchett is already a living legend in Florida law. He was the first black appointed to Florida's highest court since Reconstruction days, the first black person elected to that highest court, the first black person elected to public office in a statewide election in the entire South, and the first black person to serve on a federal appellate court in the South. Joe Hatchett is a person who lives and has lived by the ethical precepts which historically have guided the conduct of truly great judges and lawyers of our past and present, epitomizing by his professional conduct that which is very, very good about being a free American. Joe Hatchett, to me, exemplifies the best in an American judge, one who sometimes is lonely, but one who never shirks standing alone. As the governor said, the caliber of a state's judiciary is truly a prime yardstick of its culture. In a society saturated with law as ours, in a state with a burgeoning population as ours, in a state so oriented to litigation as Florida, the choice of which Florida lawyer should sit on the bench of the highest court of the state always is a decision of particular importance. Not surprisingly, the decision of who should be the ultimate guardian of our liberties, the final arbiter of state law, the final arbiter of the Florida Constitution and Florida statutes, is a decision that arouses contention among those already on the bench, those who covet that position, those who comprise the bar, and those of the general public who are to be judged by the person so selected. In the 1976 election, the question of who was to be a continuing justice of the Supreme Court of Florida was particularly heated. My friend from Miami, Bill Freites, and I served as honorary co-chairman of the campaign to elect Joe Hatchett as a Supreme Court justice in that 1976 race. Sharing that privilege with us and doing most of the work were other good friends, George, Allen, Terrell Sessoms, and Ed Gay. The campaign manager in that 1976 election was Howell Ferguson, who did a magnificent, a wonderful job of keeping the campaign machinery up and running on a daily basis, making sure that Joe Hatchett had an opportunity to sample the local food in Ever Service Club from Pensacola to Pahokee. The 1976 election to me is historically significant. First, it was the last election under a system where Supreme Court justices faced opponents in a statewide election. And second, it was the first time the citizens of this state, indeed in the entire South, elected by a landslide margin a black person to serve in a statewide office. Under the new system that went in then, if there was a vacancy on the court, the governor appointed one of the persons submitted by the Supreme Court Judicial Nominating Commission. In 1975, as you heard, Governor Askew selected from that panel Joe Hatchett to fill the vacancy created by a resignation. To continue to serve, however, a full term, Joe Hatchett had to stand for election in the primary election in September 1976. His opposition was Harvey Duval, then a well-known circuit judge in Dade County. It seemed clear to me then, and it seems clear now, that the Harvey Duval campaign was based upon deliberate inaccuracies and innuendos. For example, he claimed that in his 13 years as a trial judge, he had less than 20 reversals in the thousands of cases he had tried. A little investigative research by a young reporter, Tom Fiedler, now of the Miami Herald, brought to light the real truth. In fact, Harvey Duval, as a trial judge, had been reversed by appellate courts over 60 times. Backpedaling then, which became a common exercise as we campaign chairmen saw it in the campaign, Harvey Duval later claimed he was only counting reversals of final judgments, not other judicial orders. Not content simply to misrepresent Judge Duval's own judicial record, the Duval campaign next unleashed a barrage of misrepresentations concerning Joe Hatchett's judicial record, running ads which asserted Joe Hatchett had, quote, no state trial court experience, unquote. You've heard about that from Jesse, and you've heard about it from George, and you've heard about it from others in Will. For years in Daytona Beach, he labored in the vineyard of the state courts before he became the assistant United States attorney in Jacksonville. Harvey Duval's political ads also attacked Joe Hatchett's performance as a Supreme Court justice, claiming that Joe Hatchett was furthest behind in his work of all other justices. When pressed for proof, Harvey Duval simply stated that he had a, quote, source. Even today, we don't know the source. It was somebody, I think, called Deep Throat. Using a theme popular in today's political campaign, Harvey Duval also accused Joe Hatchett of being soft on capital punishment, of being a liberal who would refuse to impose the death penalty. In fact, Joe Hatchett had been at that time part of the majority in several Florida Supreme Court opinions upholding under Florida law death sentences. To me, the most disgusting and disgraceful of all of that political mudslinging centered on race. Without shame, Duval blatantly contended that the only reason Governor Reubin Askew had appointed Joe Hatchett to the Supreme Court was for political advantage, that Joe Hatchett was a black man. Reverse discrimination became a central plank in the Duval campaign. Everyone in Florida was to know that Duval was a white man running against Hatchett, a black man. In a heated debate before the Miami Tiger Bay Club, in a city then and now particularly sensitive to race issues, Harvey Duval stirred the boiling racial stew even further. He asserted that in 1975, Governor Askew had been so determined to name a black man to the court, and that the Judicial Nominating Committee had submitted to him 2 panels that didn't have any black men, that he rejected them all and sent them back and said, do it again, until the Judicial Nominating Commission finally submitted a list that included Joe Hatchett's name as a 7th candidate. Both the governor and the Florida Supreme Court Judicial Nominating Commission denied totally and completely those accusations. And both affirmed that Joe Hatchett's name had been included among the 7 lawyers submitted on the original list. There are in this audience, I see, lawyers who served on that nomination commission, and they know and can talk to you if you want to about it. Like many other citizens of this state, I was appalled and offended at these not at all subtle attempts to pit white against black in the 1976 campaign. Yet throughout the heated battle, as irked as Freites would get, as annoyed and mad as I would get, as agitated as Howell Ferguson would get, Joe Hatchett took the high road, refusing to be dragged to the level at which his opponent chose to fight. Joe Hatchett maintained a calm, detached posture, characteristic of a true and good jurist. He maintained a steady and quiet focus on the real issues. He alone had made his decision to serve the people, all of the people of the state of Florida, fairly and impartially. Joe Hatchett realized that any race worth winning must be based on who the person is, not on the color of his skin. One often fears that elections will be won by the candidate who screams the loudest and slings the most accusations at his opponent. The citizens of Florida in 1976 pierced through the false accusations, ignored the attempt to make race an issue, and correctly perceived and voted for the candidate who stood for integrity, courage, and fairness. By a landslide margin, the voters of Florida affirmed Governor Askew's choice. Together, the voters of Florida and Joe Hatchett on that day made history. Justice United States Circuit Judge Joseph W. Hatchett is a noble son of Florida, a person who has given his state, the South, and the judicial system very much, and I like him a great deal.
Our next presenter is Howell L. Ferguson of Tallahassee, a graduate of Yale College, of the University of Florida College of Law, and the London School of Economics. Howell is a former Assistant Attorney General of Florida and a governmental assistant of Governor Askew. He's the bearer of one of Florida's most distinguished names in the law, now of counsel to the Tallahassee firm of Landers and Parsons. Howell will speak about the 1976 election from his vantage point as campaign manager. Howell?
Mr. Chief Justice, members of the court, Judge and Mrs. Hatchett, members of the Hatchett family, ladies and gentlemen. As usual, when you follow Chesterfield, there's not much left to say about the campaign, is there? Actually, I thought with Joe Hatchett as the candidate, Reubin Askew as governor, and Chesterfield Smith as campaign manager or chairman, there wouldn't be much left for me to do. But I soon learned otherwise. Sandy Dallenberg told me at the outset that as campaign manager, I wouldn't have to worry about Joe Hatchett at all. He would do the right thing. It would be everybody else that I'd have to worry about. And I'd have to learn to say no to a lot of people. Right away, we had extremely widespread support. We had great leadership from the Florida Bar. There were 7 recent bar presidents. We had more ABA presidents and future presidents than we knew what to do with. We had a lot of elected officials from Governor Askew on down who were supporting Judge Hatchett. But with 800,000 people ready to vote, we needed more than a few leaders. We also needed and received the support and interest of thousands of ordinary good citizens of Florida. In the 14 years since Election Day on September 7, 1976, some of my memories of this have mellowed into warm, happy memories. Those hard edges have mellowed, but in the last few days I've had the opportunity to review 2 file cabinets of campaign records. And I think, as Chesterfield indicated, and as most of you remember, this was a real campaign. This was a very, very hard campaign. Many said it was a dirty campaign. The Miami Herald called it perhaps the most bitterly fought and most widely publicized election in Supreme Court history. Those of us lucky enough to be involved knew at the outset that this was much more important than anything and any participation that we had. We knew in some ways that it was even bigger than Joe Hatchett personally. It was an important election not only for Joe Hatchett as a person, but for the Florida Supreme Court, for the state of Florida, and perhaps in its own way for the country. We knew that if he won, Joe Hatchett would be the first black person in modern times elected statewide in Florida, the first in the South, and one of the very few in the country. We also knew that this election had something to do with the validity and vitality of the merit selection system, which Governor Askew referred to, which had just recently been passed and under which Justices Overton, Sundberg, and Hatchett had been appointed by Governor Askew. We felt that this election had a lot to do with the integrity of the Florida Supreme Court, which in the prior year had suffered its worst hour with scandals that had led to the resignation of 2 judges and had blemished the court's reputation. And we thought that it had something to do with the future direction of this state. At the outset, Joe Hatchett set his campaign themes as competence and integrity. He limited his campaign contributions to $100 a person, another topical item nowadays. In retrospect, that decision seemed very easy. At the time, certainly not everybody agreed with us. Justice Sundberg did the same rash thing. It seemed less comforting when his opponent was receiving $1,000, $2,000, and $3,000 contributions and was considerably ahead in fundraising. As Chesterfield Smith recounted, the Duval campaign made a great number of attacks on Judge Hatchett. One newspaper called the attacks the low road to the high court. Fortunately, the attacks could be easily rebuffed and ended up backfiring and, in essence, making Judge Duval, not Judge Hatchett, the issue. The St. Petersburg Times quoted a weary but exuberant Hatchett as saying simply, after a meeting where more attacks were made, "So we now have attacks on the press, on the bar poll, on lawyers, on the governor, on other justices. But that has nothing to do with my competence, my qualifications. The commission thought I was qualified or I wouldn't have been on the list. The governor thought I was qualified, and the lawyers who should know who's qualified, the lawyers should know who is qualified. and I rest my case on that. One attack which I never quite understood in the campaign was an attack upon Governor Askew's support. At the time, I thought it was hard enough running against Judge Hatchett, and I didn't think it was very smart to also start running against Reubin Askew in 1976. Despite these attacks, Judge Hatchett, with dignity and sometimes difficulty, no doubt, stayed with his decision not to make any counterattacks and basically ignored the innuendo and charges of reverse discrimination. The judge emphasized his own strengths and commitment to the court and told his story the old-fashioned way, traveling around the state, often driving in his own car with a volunteer or two. I didn't get to go to all those fun meetings, missed those bar meetings and debates, and had to stay back and raise money and talk to our campaign organization, which we had in every circuit at that time. Many of you may well remember those calls and letters and sometimes harassment, and certainly I remember the encouragement I received from you. I don't think my confidence ever wavered. I think I was certain that Joe Hatchett was going to be elected by the people of the state to the Supreme Court. But there were a few days in June and July when I felt awfully bad. One of them was around July the 7th when the campaign contribution reports came in and showed that we had $14,000 and Judge Duvall had $52,000. Fortunately, we changed that. By August the 5th, we had $33,000, and by September the 3rd, the last report, we had $85,000. Judge Duvall ended up raising a few $1,000s more than Judge Hatchett, but while Judge Duvall had approximately 5,000, usually large contributors, Judge Hatchett had over 3,000 contributors, and about half of those gave $25 or less. In preparing this speech, I looked through the campaign reports that we filed with the Secretary of State's office and saw scores and scores of people who gave $10, $5, $1. And then my eye caught the name of Montree Hayward of Clearwater. His contribution, 5 cents. I think that 5 cents meant more than some of those $3,000 contributions on the other side. If we were a little slow in raising money, we were also very tight in spending it, much to the chagrin of our supporters. As some of you may remember, we had no bumper stickers. We had no billboards. Nothing upsets one of your troops more than not having a billboard as they drive by the opponent's billboard every day on their way to work. And the Duvall camp had them all over the state. We did eventually distribute some brochures that made people somewhat happier. But what we had in the last several weeks of August, which the other side did not have, was about $55,000, which we were able to put into television and radio ads in every area of the state. A lot of people did not think it was a very bright idea to put Judge Hatchett on television. But we believe that if the people of Florida had a chance to see and hear Judge Hatchett for 30 seconds, he would gain their confidence and their vote. I think the judge will agree that one Saturday that we spent in Miami, in which he made the 2 30-second TV ads, was probably the longest day of the campaign. In addition to the advertisements, the newspaper editorials and their endorsements started to come in August. Judge Hatchett had met with the editors in all the major newspapers as for the normal routine interviewing process in which all candidates participate. They were obviously impressed. He received the endorsement of every major newspaper in the state and almost every weekly newspaper in the state. When the results came in on the evening of September the 7th, they were really overwhelming. I think that we hadn't been quite that confident. He won by a landslide, 539,000 to 345,000. or 61% of the vote. He swept 2/3 of the counties. In 16 counties, he won by over 60%. In 3 counties, he won by over 70%. And the worst county that he lost was Glades County, and he did a respectable 40%. He won Sarasota County by 75%, Duval County by 63%, Dade by 60%, Hillsborough by 68%, Pinellas by 70%, Leon by 67%, and on and on and on. I got kidded when I came in here about bringing an exhibit, but I actually did bring an exhibit. It's a little bit yellowed now around the edges, but it's the Miami Herald of that day with the headline, "Hatchett Defeats Duval." A smiling picture. Let me, if I may, read from Tom Fiedler's story summarizing the election. Pardon me. Supreme Court Justice Joseph W. Hatchett Tuesday became the first black in modern history to win statewide election in Florida. Hatchett, 43, solidly defeated Dade Circuit Judge Harvey S. Duval, descendant of a pioneering Florida family of the same name, in perhaps the most bitterly fought and most widely publicized election in Supreme Court history. Despite the historic nature of this victory, the comment from Hatchett, who grew up in poverty as the son of a migrant fruit picker, was reserved. He stated, "If it has any value, it's the value some young person could get in terms of motivation, knowing that he could succeed in spite of being poor and being black." Judge Hatchett made Florida and all of us proud. Thank you.
Kenneth W. Sakaya is going to give us his reflections as a research aide for Judge Hatchett. Mr. Sakaya's baccalaureate degree was received with distinction from Cornell University, and he holds the J.D. with high honors from the University of Florida. He was clerk to Justice Hatchett on the Florida Supreme Court and was his senior law clerk during Judge Hatchett's first year of service on the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. Since 1980, Mr. Sakai has served as Assistant United States Attorney for the Northern District of Florida, where he's had responsibility for the prosecution of major cases and has prepared briefs in over 50 of the major and most important appeals from that court on behalf of the government. Mr. Sakaya.
Thank you. May it please the Court, Mr. Chief Justice, Justice Hatchett and Mrs. Hatchett and members of the family and distinguished guests. It truly is an honor to be up here among this panel of distinguished guests, but it's even more of an honor for me to have an opportunity to speak about someone who has been a wonderful boss to me and a wonderful friend to me over the many years in which I have known him. I must admit it's a little bit unusual for me to be speaking in this court in this context. It's one of the few times I think an attorney has an opportunity to speak before the justices without having the fear of being interrupted every 30 seconds by questions from the court. But if they have any, I have ready responses. I have to say that when I first came to the Supreme Court and Justice Hatchett had me, or called me, I think at that time it was a roommate of mine that answered the phone, and I just couldn't believe it because I had sent my resume in so late, and he called and said, some guy, he called himself Judge Hatchett, called, and I just, no, you're kidding. I was flabbergasted, and I was very awed when I came here and looked at the hallowed halls and the courtroom and so forth. And I think Justice Sundberg had something to do with my being hired. I know that in his letter that he sent back to me, in which he told me quite clearly that he'd hired other persons and that I was not someone he'd be interested in, he nonetheless told me that he was passing my name on to some of the other judges, sort of. But I do understand that he gave a hearty recommendation to Justice Hatchett, and it was quite awe-inspiring to be here. I was really taken by it all until I guess that first week when Justice Hatchett introduced me to Justice Sundberg, and he looked down at my legs and he said, "Good to meet you, Ken. I like your socks, especially the blue one." And I knew my term on the court would be not all pomp and circumstance, but I want to say a word or two about Justice Hatchett as a judge, and then hopefully I'll have an opportunity to say something about him as a person. I'm not saying you can necessarily separate the two. I know that in many respects there are other law clerks who are much more qualified than I to speak about Justice Hatchett's service on the court. I think of Bob Benton and the brilliant service that he gave as Justice Hatchett's first law clerk. I'm confident that the other law clerks would agree that he set a standard that really all of us simply tried to match. Bob, when asked to give some comments about his experience on the court, really gave some meaty, worthwhile comments, many of which I will not share with you because of the time factor, but I do want to share with you some. In referring to Justice Hatchett's first year on the court, Bob writes that it was Justice Hatchett who wrote for the new majority in the decision holding that no legal impediment precluded disbarring a former justice for misconduct while serving on the court. And later it was Justice Hatchett whose vote in favor of Justice Overton's Chief Justiceship was determinative. A quick study, Justice Hatchett distinguished himself in a whole spectrum of cases. Some of the justice's best opinions were those in criminal cases. The decision in Baker v. State comes to mind. The same court that had affirmed the denial of a retrial for Pitts and Lee decided against Baker, citing the Pitts and Lee decision as controlling precedent. Not unaware of this recent history, the Supreme Court reversed unanimously. As may be true for any justice more concerned with the long-term development of the law than with appearances of the moment, some of Justice Hatchett's best opinions were in dissent. The dissent in Corn v. State reflects an important point of view that would not have found expression if Justice Hatchett had not participated in that case. While I was on the court, I had the distinction of serving at a time that I thought was very significant. I'm sure that every law clerk who clerked for the judge felt the same way. But I know there are lots of opinions that I had an opportunity to assist on. And I can tell you this, that Justice Hatchett was and is still a judge who is concerned with the economy of words. He likes the little book by Strunk and White called Elements of Style. When a law clerk comes to work for Justice Hatchett, he lets them know right away he isn't interested in unnecessary language that's simply going to waste the time of the attorneys. He's not concerned for purple prose that might take him, make a certain niche for him for posterity's sake. He's concerned for simply the right and the wrong of a decision, for simply saying it straightforwardly, clearly. Judy reminded me this week, Judy Miller, of an occasion that I think underscored this. Justice Hatchett was very careful about the opinions and about what was said in them. And there was one day we had an opinion that had to go out by 2 o'clock. And apparently there was a mistake in the draft. And it was brought to my attention. And I thought, well, I didn't understand what the big deal was. It was only 2 letters. But it turned out to be the letters U and N, un, that was supposed to be in front of the word constitutional. And I didn't know what all the hullabaloo was about. But we did catch the mistake and thereby did not change the course of constitutional law in Florida by that opinion. All of the law clerks have noted when asked to state their comments, and let me say that there were the law clerks that I spoke to are all very distinguished, and I really appreciated the opportunity to work with them. I know Susan Barber was the law clerk who was working with Justice Hatchett when I came, and she was just a dear. She was a wonderful help to me. She's now raising 4 children, and by the way, building houses on the side while they're at school. Wilbert Stevenson is now a circuit judge in Fort Lauderdale. Bob Benton, whom I mentioned, is now an administrative law judge for the state of Florida. Brian Norton has a distinguished career in public service for the state and the citizens of the state. I think Justice Hatchett has done a good job in selecting those persons for whom or who work with him. And that's true as well for his support staff. You know, I think you can tell a lot about a boss by the tenure of his employees. When Justice Hatchett came here from Jacksonville, Doc Bradley transferred from Jacksonville to Tallahassee with him. She served with him here for 2 years, left in 1977, after 14 years of service with the judge. At that time, Judy Miller was brought on to work as the judge's secretary. She has been with the judge now 14 years, 2 secretaries, 27 years. And I might add that the 3rd secretary is one that I was sorry that the judge hired because she was my secretary at the time, Dolores Grayson, and she is a superb secretary as well and has been with him since that time. I guess it was back in the early 80s. I appreciated very much my every opportunity to serve with the judge, but I want to say a word or two about my personal, or the judge's, my personal experience with the judge and something more about his personal character. Without exception, the law clerk cited his caring and compassionate nature. And that's something you see when you work in the office. To give you an example, these may seem like little things, but if you're going to go visit Judge Hatchett, you better be prepared to meet some other people because he's going to bring you around and introduce you to his law clerks. I can't tell you how many people while I served with the judge that I met, he'd bring into my office and introduce me to them. He had a genuine, it seemed to all of us, concern about their concerns and their needs. And I think this was reflected not only in his judicial integrity, but also in the manner in which he spoke with us about them. And I appreciated that in the judge. The other thing that it's been mentioned here that the judge was someone who thought about higher things than simply matters on this earth. And I know that on occasion I had opportunity to speak with him. I remember a lunch one time that we had. I'm not sure what exactly the context was, but I think we were talking about how short life is. And the judge said, well, Ken, remember what it says in Ecclesiastes. And then he proceeded to quote, I think it's chapter 12 of Ecclesiastes, remember your Creator in the days of thy youth, before the days draw nigh, and so forth. And, I mean, word for word, it's, at least so I thought, and could have been all wrong, I guess. But no, I appreciated that about the judge. He called us to consider weightier matters than simply the day-to-day hassles that we were facing on the court and in our own lives. Since leaving Judge Hatchett's employ, the situation has remained the same from the standpoint of his caring attitude. There hasn't been a Christmas that has gone by since I have left in the past 10 years that I haven't gotten a card from the judge. On special occasions, he is very concerned about what's happening in the lives of his law clerks. We occasionally have an opportunity to meet for lunch, and he's very interested in what's going on in my life, and I know this is true, I'm sure, of his other law clerks as well. I appreciate that very much about the judge, and I appreciate his counsel and his advice in important times in my still young career. But in conclusion, at Justice Hatchett's investiture, the Bible was open to a particular verse in Micah chapter 6, verse 8, which now Judge Hatchett has made into a plaque which sits in his office today. And the verse reads, He hath shown thee, O man, what is good. And what doth the Lord require of thee? But to do justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly before thy God. As all who know him can attest, Judge Hatchett's life on and off the bench is exemplified by the compassion for others and humility towards God, as expressed in that his favorite scripture. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Our next speaker is my longtime friend and law partner, so I can't brag about him too much, although he deserves it. Alan C. Sundberg of Tallahassee is a senior member and major breadwinner of the Florida firm of Carlton Fields, Ward, Emanuel Smith, and Cutler. Alan is a graduate of Florida State University, where he received his undergraduate degree, and the Harvard Law School. Long and active, successful, and distinguished practitioner in Pinellas County, he was appointed to the Supreme Court, as you've heard, by Governor Askew in the merit selection process in 1975, was re-elected to the court in 1976, and served as Chief Justice of the court in 1980 and 82. He is a fellow of the American College of Trial Lawyers and the International Academy of Trial Lawyers, and he will speak on Judge Hatchett's service on the court.
May it please the court, Mr. Chief Justice, members of the court. Judge Hatchett, Betty, Cheryl, Paul, and other members of the family, distinguished and honored guests all. Mr. Chief Justice, I have found you to be a very tough timekeeper during oral arguments at this court. Not so liberal and benevolent as some of your predecessors. But you have today been bested by Nancy Dobson. She gave each of us the grand total of 8 minutes to expound on our experiences with Judge Hatchett. She didn't mention what the sanction would be for running overtime, but it was apparent that it would be severe, and Chesterfield, if I were you, I would be very concerned right now. Even though I was a colleague of Joe Hatchett on this court for only 4 years, it is nigh on impossible to capture the essence of that relationship in only 8 minutes. What to include? How to best express to others the very great admiration one feels for another who has traveled with you through some of the most fulfilling years of your life. So if I fail in these few minutes, chalk it up to the time constraints and not too any lack of affection for the man. Joe and I were the boys of summer in the year 1975. Governor Askew appointed me to the court in June 1975, and then had the singular good judgment to appoint Joe Hatchett in September of that year, from probably the largest group of nominees ever submitted for a seat on this court. I refer to us as boys because Joe was only 43 then, while I was not quite 42. Neither of us had the gray hair which now adorns our heads either. Although I was senior to Joe by appointment, he was senior to me not only chronologically, but in judicial experience, because as you've heard, he had been selected and served as the first magistrate to be appointed in the United States District Court for the Middle District of Florida. The composition of the court then was a rare mix of backgrounds and experience. Both Jimmy Adkins and Ben Overton had been circuit judges. Joe Boyd had had a rich background in county government in Dade County.
Arthur England was credentialed as a tax practitioner and sometime advisor to the governor and the legislature on tax, administrative law, and consumer issues. B.K. Roberts was B.K. Roberts. I had been a plain garden variety lawyer in St. Petersburg. Joe Hatchett brought to this group a knowledge of federal practice and procedure, as well as a thorough grounding in federal substantive and constitutional law. This diversity of backgrounds gave that court a range of collegial perspective, which, in my opinion, greatly enhanced its decision-making capacity. Joe's contribution to this varied group lay not only in his substantive knowledge of federal constitutional precedents, but more importantly, in his good, hard common sense and steadiness. Steadiness. That was an important quality to have on that court because the majority of us averaged only 44 years of age. We were fearless, primarily because we were too naive to know otherwise. We pushed the jurisprudence of this state to the cutting edge and sometimes almost over the edge. On a court like that, you need a steadying influence to temper excesses. Joe Hatchett was just such an influence. He asked the hard, common sense questions to test the premises of those of us who were prone to fly. Although I authored the opinion of this court with respect to permitting electronic media in the courtrooms of this state, Joe Hatchett provided invaluable input to that decision. During the drafting stage, when we were attempting to accommodate two great constitutional imperatives, the right to a fair trial and the right of the public to know about the workings of its government through a full, free press coverage. The steadiness of his counsel contributed greatly to accomplish the proper balance between those imperatives. Joe's pragmatic good sense was of even greater value to me personally during the election campaign of 1976, which you've already heard a great deal about here today. When Joe and I ran in the last popular election for judges of this court. By the way, limiting campaign contributions to $100 in my case was not a very great sacrifice. I can't recall anyone ever wanting to give me more than $100. But back to my story. Joe and I were invited to appear before the Sunshine Democratic Club in West Palm Beach. John Moyle, with whom Reubin Askew is very familiar, was helping in both our campaigns, Joe and me, and arranged for our appearance at a rally at the Sunshine Democratic Club. I arrived in John's office in West Palm early that day to find that a morning editorial in the Palm Beach Post was questioning the propriety of nonpartisan judges appearing at a partisan political rally. The Code of Judicial Conduct was unclear on the subject, but appeared to permit it so long as the judicial candidate engaged in no partisan comments or activities. However, John Moyle and I wrung our hands and agonized all day over the issue. And we were literally about to cancel the appearance when Joe arrived later in the day. When we described the issue to him, he said, "No problem." And I said, "No problem?" To which he responded, "Who do you think ultimately interprets the Code of Judicial Conduct?" Moyle and I got the picture. We all attended the rally, and not another word was ever heard of that episode. Joe had an uncanny way of recognizing tempests and teapots. On another occasion, I had the opportunity to give Joe some advice on an opinion he was offering. The case was State versus City of Sunrise. It was a bond validation proceeding concerning double advance refunding bonds issued by that municipality. Since Joe knew that I had been involved in some bond validation cases during private practice, he sought my advice and counsel on this complex issue. I assured him that such schemes surely violated Article 7 of the Constitution, and furthermore, such bonds were unwise and physically unsound. Following my sage counsel, Joe circulated an opinion saying essentially that, and it was ultimately published. And that's when the fun began. There was a record number of petitions for rehearing filed in that case. The appellant, the appellee, the Attorney General, countless amicus curiae from local governments to underwriters all filed. And they, as one voice, said in a polite but firm way that the Supreme Court had screwed up. And they were right. On rehearing, the original opinion was withdrawn, the bonds were validated, and Hatchett J. wrote for the court on rehearing, and I quote, "Our decision cannot reach the question of whether the revenue bond plan presently before us is physically sound, or whether double advance refunding is a wise method of financing municipal undertakings." Joe never came to me for any more advice on bonding cases after that. While a member of the Florida Supreme Court, Joe Hatchett contributed significantly to the development of the law of this state. He authored several of the landmark decisions which fashioned the law respecting the legal relationships inhering in condominium ownership and living. He was responsible for authoring the opinion which determined for the first time the standard of discipline to be imposed upon a lawyer for misconduct while serving as a judge. A quote from Hatchett J. "The conduct engaged in by the judge while a justice of the highest court of this state cuts to the very heart of the judicial system, a system carefully established to ensure that equal justice under law prevails in this country for the rich and the poor, the powerful and the powerless. The judge's conduct has done much to erode the public's confidence in the integrity and impartiality of the judiciary and the bar, thus undermining the entire judicial process. There can be no temporizing with an offense, the commission of which serves to destruct the judicial process." His opinion in Morgan versus State shaped the law with respect to the rights and obligations of a member of the press to maintain the confidentiality of its sources. Through other of his opinions, he has spoken eloquently for the position of the First Amendment in our society. Another quote, if you will, from Hatchett J. "Our principal concern here is preservation of freedom of speech for all citizens. Overbroad statutes create the danger that a citizen will be punished as a criminal for exercising his right of free speech. If this possibility were the only evil of overbroad statutes, it might suffice to review convictions on a case-by-case basis. But the mere existence of statutes and ordinances purporting to criminalize protected expression operates as a deterrent to the exercise of the rights of free expression and deters most effectively the prudent, the cautious, and the circumspect, the very persons whose advice we seem generally to be most in need of." That's pretty powerful praise. Florida's legal system and all the citizens of this state are better off for Joe Hatchett's service on the Supreme Court of Florida. I consider myself fortunate indeed to have served on this court with him. But Joe has been more than a professional colleague to me. He has been and continues to be a good friend. Colleagues come and go, but sound good friends are forever. Thank you very much.
Judge Hatchett, would you come forward, please? The presentations which you've heard, sir, the reaction of your audience reflects the respect with which we hold you and your service to the administration of justice. It reflects upon you and all who alike serve the administration of justice in great favor and great distinction. I have the pleasure on behalf of the Supreme Court Historical Society to present to you at this time this plaque in recognition of your service as a justice of the court. It reads in part, the Supreme Court of Florida in Ceremonial Session and the Florida Supreme Court Historical Society in our oral history program do recognize and honor Joseph W. Hatchett for his unique contributions to the federal and state judiciaries and to the administration of justice. As a justice, Supreme Court of Florida 1975-79, and as a United States Circuit Judge in the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit 1979-81, and the United States Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit 1981 to the present time. I present this to you, sir, with our respect, our thanks, and our gratitude.
I know how busy this time of year is for the Supreme Court of Florida, and we've all witnessed on coming into the building the fact that the building is not complete at this time. And yet the Supreme Court of Florida took it upon themselves to allow us to have this ceremony here today. And Mr. Chief Justice and Justices, I'm grateful. Betty and I thank you for fitting this session into your schedule at this time of the year. Betty and I also want to thank the Florida Supreme Court Historical Society. Reese Smith, the president of the society, Ms. Nancy Dodson, who has worked so hard to put this program together. I was looking through some materials a few days ago, and I noted that the present president, Reese Smith, was one of the original signers of the charter for this organization back in 1977. So we thank you for arranging this program. And it's a great idea to honor and to preserve the history of the state of Florida, its judicial branch. All of these folks here have said so many good things, and as you can see, they are my oldest and my best friends. If they were not, they would certainly be after today. George and Jesse McCrary go back to what I call the scratching days. George has already described our big cases back in the 1959s. His got larger and larger, and I went on into becoming a judge, which obviously meant my cases got smaller and smaller. But I'm so grateful that George is here and Jesse's here, and we worked so hard together during that campaign that we've heard so much about. It was people like them that supported me and that encouraged me and that kept me going in the middle of the night. And we were somewhere on Alligator Alley or someplace trying to make one more session to talk to 10 or 12 more people. Governor Askew has described our meeting out by the pool at the mansion. All of my neighbors in Jacksonville were so excited when I told them I was going over to talk to the governor. And they had stayed up about all night having a big party telling me how great I was going over to see the governor. So by the time I got to Tallahassee, everything was fine. I didn't need to get the appointment. I was already a celebrity in my neighborhood. At that time, you had to file an application with the commission in order to become the justice or to get your name forwarded to the governor. And I filled out my form with great care, but I didn't think I would really get appointed. And as I said, after the way my friends had reacted, I didn't need to get appointed. Everything was just fine. Until I sat by the pool that Sunday afternoon and talked to Governor Askew. And I could hardly drive back to Jacksonville after that talk because he told me of what he was trying to do in the state of Florida and how he wanted to do it and the kind of goals and aims that he had for this Supreme Court of Florida. And then I had a burning, burning desire to get a part of that, to become a part of doing whatever I could to help Florida become a better state. And so then I really wanted the appointment. Now I remember Brenda, my little daughter who can't be here today, when the governor called, she says, "Daddy, there's some man on the phone." She's about this high. I said, "Brenda, who was it?" She said, "I think he said his name was Askew." Well, I walked over to the telephone, and my life has not been the same since. I appreciate the appointment, Governor. It was a changing place in our life, and Betty and I appreciate your friendship through the years. We talked a lot about the 1976 campaign. I'd met Chesterfield Smith while I was an assistant U.S. attorney, and even then you knew not to go close to him because he was the greatest lawyer in the world, and if you didn't have a proper introduction, you dare not approach him. So Judge William McRae, who was then a district judge in Jacksonville, I happened to be in his courtroom that day, and he introduced me to Chesterfield Smith. Even then, his reputation was great throughout the state, even though at that time he had not become president of the American Bar Association. So after serving for 15 months on this court, I was clear and felt that I had done a good job, but that's not enough to win an election, I learned. And obviously one who had not been in politics before and had been in the federal system rather than in the state system needed one thing more than anything else, and that was acceptance by the organized bar. And the organized bar in America and the organized bar in Florida is personified by Chesterfield Smith. So I was sitting here in my office that day and the phone rang and a voice came over the phone just about like the voice that started out here today. Said, "Hey, I want to help you in your campaign." My first thought was, I don't want this person helping me in my campaign. So I said, "Who are you, sir?" He said, "Chesterfield Smith." I said, "Where are you calling from?" He said, "Lakeland." I said, "May I drive down there tonight?" And Sandy Dallenberty, so many others, leaders of the bar who helped during that campaign. And I'm grateful for the help that they gave me then, and I'm grateful for your kind words today. I suppose I knew less about my campaign manager during a campaign than any candidate on earth, because Howell Ferguson told me the first day, "I'll run to office. I want you to shake every hand in the state of Florida." And here Judy Miller, who is now my secretary, would give me a list and say, "Now, Kiwanis Club here, Elks Club there, Tea Party here, coffee there, and get out there and go." And that's basically what I did, and Howell would tell me the next stop, and on we would go. And we developed into great friends. If you have a tough campaign, try and get Howell Ferguson. He'll do the job for you. I really don't know what to say about Alan Sundberg. He still thinks I made a mistake in that case because I followed his advice. I was just as dumb as he was, and I followed my own advice. I didn't need his help to blow up a case. I did several that way. Ken Sakaya has said the great things about his time in the office, and you know you really get to know and to love your law clerks. You spend all day with them every day, and you argue with them, and you tell them to shut up when the argument is over, and you all go about writing your opinion and getting it out. You spend an awful lot of time, and they all become members of your family, and Ken was one of the very first. And I am grateful for the things that you've said here today, Ken, and good luck to you in your endeavors. Some very special people here I want to mention. Of course, Betty. Every time she gets her life organized, I file it up. I apply for something, change positions, run for office, do something that'll upset her and will upset the kids and get them to move from school to school, from city to city. And Betty's very quiet, and she just sits back and supports me through all of these efforts. So I'm thankful to her. I've got a whole family of people here. My brother Paul, my daughter, my good buddies, my grandsons there. Stand up, guys. My niece is here, Paulette Sims, my mother-in-law, husband of one of my nieces, and the man you've heard so much about, the infamous Horace Hill, my first boss down in Daytona Beach. Horace, will you stand? Back here's my first law clerk, Bob Benton, who, Bob, please stand, who got me through those first days. Susan Barber, another law clerk, is there on the second row. And Judy Miller, 14 years my secretary. You please stand, Judy. You can tell that Judy was just a little girl when she came aboard to work here at this court. This is a great institution, the Florida Supreme Court. The history will reflect that this court has served now since 1845. That's a long time. That means that it served through slavery, Civil War, Reconstruction, the New Deal, the Old Deal, the New Frontier, and on and on and on and on. History also reflects that there have been 73 justices of this court, 72 men, 1 woman, and I'm as proud as can be to have served as the 64th justice. During the years of 1975, 1979, which those of us who served during that period like to call the Askew years, because there were very exciting times during those years. A few personal comments. I am so happy the Supreme Court could arrange to hold this here. This building has meant so much to me. I first came here in 1953. Some political science teacher out at Florida A&M, when I was a sophomore there, required that I come and hear an argument and report back to the class. The case became a very historic one. It was Hawkins versus the Board of Control. Arguing that case for Hawkins was Horace Hill, the man that I went to work for years and years later. That was back in 1953. Then I came to this building again in 1959 because at that time everyone who passed the bar in Florida had to come to this building and stand in this room in order to take the oath of office to practice law in this state. That tradition is no longer in place, I understand. And then to come back here in 1975 as a justice of the court, and then to come back here today. So this building means an awful lot to me. A little about the court that Alan Sundberg has not told you about. As I said, it was the Askew years. He had already outlined to me some things that he wanted to accomplish in this state. Because he wanted to accomplish so much, we had advisory opinion requests about every month. There were some very burning issues that were present at that time: casino gambling, straw vote on busing, cameras in courtrooms, and to add to all of that, the death penalty was reinstituted during those first few years. So it was a very, very exciting time to be on the court. There was a lot of tension in state government at that time. There was tension in this court at that time. Someone has mentioned that there were some unfortunate events that had occurred at the court. 4 new justices had come on in a period of less than 2 years. And the issues were burning, and the conferences were long, and the discussions were long. We were seldom unanimous in our opinions, but I pay a great tribute to all of the justices that I served with. I served with Justices Roberts, Boyd, Atkins, Overton, Sundberg, England, Alderman, and Carl. In every instance, we worked hard, we differed a lot, but we never forgot what we were about. That was to pronounce the law of this state, to interpret the Constitution to the best of our abilities. And that's what we did. There was times in this court when things were so tense that the press reported that we were not speaking to each other, all kinds of things that were not true. The pressure was so great that we finally started holding our court meetings right here in the middle of the courtroom, inviting the press in to see and hear, to simply dispel the rumors that there was some kind of animosity among the justices and that the system was breaking down. That simply was not true. And I pay tribute to all of those justices that I served with. It's great to have had the opportunity to serve on this court. I think that through it all, what I learned was that if you bring together people of great experience, bring together people who want to have justice under law and equal justice under law, although they may differ on some issues, finally you move to a point where there's a good rule of law that comes out of it, and what the individuals thought about it at the time makes little difference. As Alan Sundberg has pointed out, we ran in the last old-fashioned election. Thank God there are no elections of that type anymore for the Supreme Court. But we're going to be back in that position if we don't make merit retention for appellate judges work. If the justices of this court can be turned out of office because of a sentence in one opinion, or if they can be turned out of office because they signed their name to a majority opinion, then we're all going to be right back where we were in 1976 when the justices are running around the state raising money and running the risk of getting themselves in more trouble than you and I want them to get into. And that's going to happen unless people like us, the people who are here today, go out and explain merit retention to our people and tell them the importance of judicial independence. We've been here a long time, so I think I ought to stop here. And next year when you come here to do this again, I'll pick up right here. You are going to do this next year, aren't you? Well, if you won't do it next year, then thank you so very much for this year. It was a real pleasure serving you on this court for that 4-year period. God bless.
Judge Hatchett, thank you for the opportunity to honor you today. Thank you for your distinguished service to advance the administration of justice. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on this historic occasion and participating with the Florida Historical Society. Mr. Chief Justice, this completes our ceremonial session.
Thank you, President Smith. I should have done something earlier, but I didn't do. I'd like to recognize some of the justices who have been, who attended here, Justice England, Justice Atkins, and of course Justice Sundberg. Justices O'Connell and Boyd and Roberts were here, but apparently they had other callings. Following this ceremony, there will be a reception hosted by the Society in the South Courtyard. area where the reception will be held. If anyone needs an elevator, there's an elevator behind this courtroom through the same door. Justice Hatchett, we thank you for making this afternoon possible and for what it was. Mr. President, the court is very obliged to you and society for this excellent presentation. It has added immeasurably to the permanent records of the society. This ceremonial session is now complete.